Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar focused on the really important topic of diversity and inclusion. For those of you who don't know, I'm Suzanne Jacob. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at DHR International and also one of the corporate sponsors for our firm's internal Diversity and Inclusion Council. We're really grateful to have a senior leader joining us for today's conversation, Deena Piquion, Senior Vice President and General Manager at Xerox. I think we all know the facts, which is that diverse companies perform better. And coupled that with cultural change and demographic shifts, it means that companies today need to be listening and speaking to that broader consumer base more than ever. And we, as talent search consultants and talent advisors, can clearly tie those realities to our work. We are in the room where hiring and succession decisions are made, and we're setting those candidate slates. So this all gives us a unique responsibility to be delivering a range of talented leaders and advising our clients and their leadership teams to make the best talent decisions possible with that lens of diversity and inclusion included in the selection process. Today, I'm excited that Deena will be sharing her perspective, and I know you'll gain insights to bring to your clients and to your organization, and we'll also send some follow-ups with our key thoughts and points. Our hosts today are Lizette Ibarra, Managing Partner of DHR's Miami office, and Dwayne Celestin, Managing Partner of our Global Diversity Practice. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I hope you are too. Lizette, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for that intro. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this conversation where, as Suzanne very well pointed out, we will be discussing the importance of being diversity advocates in the workplace, but also how can we be better advocates of diversity into our clients' efforts. So I'm honored to present our guest today, Deena Piquion. But before I begin to share her amazing credentials and trajectory in tech, let me tell you how I met Deena a few years ago. So I was helping her fill a critical, executive role for her Latin America operations, and I could tell firsthand that she was a courageous leader, a risk taker, a sound business partner, and a true diversity advocate. Why? Because we were approaching the end of the process, and we had already 2 finalists, male, and she comes to me and she says, Lisette, I want to bring a female candidate to the slate. And of course, she made me sweat a little bit because, as you are well aware, it's not easy to find female candidates within tech. And so we did, and we, approached the end of the process with a very strong male and a very strong female candidate. And I later knew that, this wasn't a company mandate. It was Deena's, true effort to bring a diverse team. So that's how we met a few years ago. And now back to her. She brings 20 years of progressive experience within tech. She's the Vice President and General Manager at Xerox Corporation for Latin America, where she currently oversees the company's operations, which includes all direct and indirect sales activity throughout Central, South America, and the Caribbean. Prior to joining Xerox, Deena had an amazing run with Tech Data Corporation for 19 years, which she most recently served as Vice President and General Manager of Latin America and the Caribbean. She had full P&L responsibility there for the region and led the successful integration of an acquired competitor. Deena holds a bachelor's degree in political science and government from Vassar College in New York, also a master's degree of science in foreign service from Georgetown University in DC, and she also undertook the Women in Leadership Executive Program at Yale. She was the recipient of the Florida Diversity Council Glass Ceiling Award in 2016 and of the CRN Women of the Channel Honoree in 2017. And as a good advocate of diversity, she speaks fluent English, Spanish, French, and Creole. So, bienvenida, Deena. Thank you for being with us here today.
Gracias, Lisette. Thank you so much. And let me say kudos to DHR for putting these events together. It's not every company that's as progressive as you are, so I just want to thank you guys for putting this together. It does make a difference. Even though I'm a diversity advocate, I'm constantly also challenging myself, right, to take my own blinders off. There's a great article in Harvard Business Review this month, if anybody's interested, about the one facet of diversity that we don't talk about very much, which is class, and how we need to make a better effort in corporate America, especially to give people of different, socioeconomic class a chance to rise in companies, right? And have them be part of the candidate slate. So it's easy to also get very focused on the areas that intersect with yourself, right? Females in tech and Afro-Caribbeans and Latinas, but we have to also always challenge ourselves to think about the others that may be forgotten.
Absolutely.
Well, Deena, glad to have you this afternoon, and thank you very much for spending some time with us. As the lead of the Global Diversity Practice, I get an opportunity to interview and speak with many senior leaders who are diverse. And it's always fascinating, since 70% of my placements are diverse, it's always fascinating to hear their stories of how they broke through from being a middle management person to a senior level executive. Would you share a little bit of that piece of your journey with us?
Sure, absolutely. So first, once I started in tech and in tech data and had a great experience to be able to be in a management training program and prepare myself for middle management and ultimately senior level management, I set goals for myself. I'm very goal oriented. And so I said, I want to be director by the time I'm 35. Like, I don't know why I chose that, but that was my timeline that I wanted to be on. And things were going well. I was a senior manager. I was in my 30s. I had just had kids, and a director position opened up, and my boss was leaving. He happened to be leaving to another company after an over 20-year career there. I was in the succession plan. I had been identified as a potential successor. I had been working for this, but it happened to be a really tough time in my life, right? My son was diagnosed with leukemia when he was just under 3. And it happened to be during his treatment that this opportunity came up. And, it was a tough one to grapple with, right? Because it was something I had always worked for, right? And I knew this opportunity, one like it wouldn't come up that often, that I was so well positioned for and, ready for, really. And so, because my son was doing well in treatment, and because the doctors had a really, favorable prognosis for him that as long as he followed protocol, that he would be fine, I did pursue it aggressively, right? I put my hand, I raised my hand, and I made sure that people, considered me, and I relied on all of my past experience, right? Proving myself for, the over 10 years before that, right? And the fact that I was still working and juggling a personal, family matter and still delivering. And I was able to actually get that directorship level right at my 35th year, actually in my 35th year. But it was because I spoke up, right? And I was very clear about, what I had done to earn that position, why I felt I was well positioned for it, and how I would continue to give in the future.
No, that's helpful. Many people in that journey of going from kind of mid-management to more senior management benefit from having mentors or someone that's a godfather, godmother aiding their movement. And many times those people look like the junior version of themselves. Unlikely that you had a senior version of yourself in the company. Did you have any mentors, and what kind of guidance did they provide along the way?
Yes, I did have mentors, and I would say, all of my bosses were my mentors. I started at such a young age and really was fortunate enough to have some really great, mentors and bosses. They were all male. It was tech, right? None of them looked like me. None of them were necessarily dealing with exactly the same issues that I was. But I took the best out of each and every one of them. And, one of them really taught me, my first one actually, to really do your homework, be an expert, always be well-read. And well-versed on your subject, on your industry, on your market. My next one was all about accountability. Your word is your brand. If you say you're going to do something, you do it, you deliver, because you want your brand to be associated with delivering, even if it's not perfect. Favor delivering over perfection. And that was hard for me at first, but it was a really great lesson. And then one of my last bosses, actually at Tech Data, he was really all about the human touch. He was, a 40+ career, leader in the industry. And I had him right before he retired as my boss. And he was always about, you can make tough decisions, but still deliver them in a human way and be a human leader, right? Regardless of, looking out for the business.
Well, one of the things that was powerful about what you said is many people can be a mentor or a leader. They can be a supervisor or not. And I think being open and receptive to a variety of inputs and what the lessons are that they can share is important. When you think about one of the things that Lizette shared is that you are a diversity advocate as opposed to just being a diverse leader, which are not quite the same thing. Can you share with us what encouraged you or moved you to be an advocate versus just a leader doing a great job in your area of responsibility?
Definitely. So Lizette mentioned that I was recognized at the Women of the Channel. It was a big industry event for tech, for channel in tech. And I was invited to be a keynote speaker in December of 2017, right after I received that award. It was my first really big audience. It was about 1,000 women in a ballroom at this conference. And it was shortly after I had reached VP GM level. And so that's why they invited me to speak. And I shared my stories and the challenges and, different comments and assumptions I had to overcome during my career journey. And I also shared with them how I had decided, to not compromise myself or my values, right, or who I was as I grew in my career, and really focused on being a character-driven leader. And I got such overwhelming response from young women at that conference who were looking for mentors that looked like them. And that's when I realized that I had a responsibility to be more public, to be more outspoken, and to provide that mentorship to people in the way that I didn't necessarily get, right? I had great mentors, but none that looked like me and none that necessarily faced the same challenges as me. And so that's when I really decided to be more public about my advocacy, about the topic, and actually created a blog and a community where I started mentoring younger women too, and just getting them to think about those next steps in their career.
So reaching back, that's always good.
It is.
As you reflect on, say, the last 3 to 5 years, as you think about your diversity impact, what might be one of your largest wins that you've had thus far?
So definitely reaching the level that I reached. I think that's kind of my first one that I'm really proud of. In Latin America, in technology, as Lizette well knows, when I asked her for that diverse candidate, you can't find them very easily. So I'm often the only woman at the table. And so just reaching that level, I think, is in a male-dominated industry is an accomplishment. But then I think also giving back. That's really what I feel most proud about, is that I still see people at Tech Data now who are senior managers or on the cusp of becoming directors who started with me as interns, as students in college. And that to me is the most rewarding. Absolutely.
So as you think about some of the hurdles of building a more diverse team, particularly in the tech space, being in Florida, your population is a little bit different than other parts of the country. What are some of the hurdles you've had to overcome to build that more diverse team?
Yeah, I think, number one is kind of in our industry, and I think in a lot of industries, there's still a bit of a good old boys network, right, where people use their mental Rolodex and kind of go through the names that they know. And it often ends up being people that look like them, right? Because we often socialize with people that look like us. So I think that's a big hurdle in our industry, is making sure that you prepare the talent, but then that you present the talent and that you make sure they get in front of the opportunities, right? And that it's not just always a tap on the shoulder to somebody who knows somebody. And I think that's been really important. And building sustainable programs. So, the Yale Women in Leadership program was something that we pioneered. It wasn't necessarily something that our company would have suggested that we go to. It was us. We took on the burden, right? And we said, no, this is something you need to start demonstrating that you support and that you have interest in and that you actually get behind. And it's not only about the senior leaders going, it's about creating a program to have this be available to the younger talent, the pipeline that you need to start building to have at the table. So it's all about the pipeline, and it's all about overcoming that instinct to just tap the people on the back that you know.
Well, we have one suggestion about how you broaden your network. You bring guys like us into into the process, and we can go well beyond who you know. The last official question we have for you is, on this call and in our firm, we work with hundreds of firms of all sorts and sizes, not-for-profits, large public, private equity, and other types of organizations. How might we encourage them to have more Deenas, not a Deena, but more Deenas on their leadership team? What might we do to make that, help them with that particular opportunity?
I think first, senior leaders need to actually first care, but then also back up that care with actual action, right? And so, ERGs are a great way to demonstrate to your employee population that these are things that you care about, and also to start being able to get access to that talent that you might not have necessarily known. So that's a really great best practice. And then you'll start to see that there'll be like new passion and excitement that comes out of people who might be on the board of an ERG or, speaking at a special event that an ERG coordinates, because you have to be open to the dialogue. And I think that that's the first step. And those ERGs, these types of events, they create the dialogue that allows you to hear and listen and demonstrate that you care. And then the other is, make sure that you're promoting the people, and promoting, I don't mean promoting to the next level in their career. I mean, actually, giving them some PR and some warm and fuzzy feelings about the work they're doing when they do become an advocate, right? Show them that you're proud, that you care, that you're happy that they are part of your organization and that they are a diversity advocate. And I think that's been really important to me. Before I made the choice to come to Xerox, that was one of my questions in the interview process was, I'm very passionate about this topic. How do you feel about it? Or, how do you feel about me speaking publicly on these issues and having my own blog? And so knowing that your boss and the company care and support it as well allows people to develop and actually become the advocates that you need within the organization.
Well, thank you very much, Deena. And while we have you and we have so many of our colleagues on, I'd like to enable them to ask some questions that they may have.
I've popped back on, and I'll ask our audience to please submit your questions via the Q&A or the chat. But while we're waiting for those to come in, I'll go ahead and ask one. I think this is something that is very clear to all of you, but maybe for the rest of our audience, how does diversity differ between the United States and Latin America, specifically where you are? Like, what are some of those differences in diversity that you guys see in your work?
Yeah, so great question. It's very different, and I think probably very different in many other parts of the world than it is in the US, where where here it's very normal to self-identify and to be part of groups. It's not like that in Latin America necessarily, right? The concept of the self-identification and, you know, employee resource groups doesn't necessarily exist yet. For privacy laws and things too, there's very different ways of treating how people identify themselves. So that just it causes different dynamics. Of course, Latin America, there's no shortage of Latin talent, right? I mean, that's great. You know, it's a very different challenge than there is in the US in technology, for example. But there is still a very big gender gap. So that is a huge issue in Latin America. And some countries like Brazil have done some great work on ability and diversity, right? And Ecuador also. So it's really interesting how they can be very ahead in some areas and really looking at, you know, ability and representation, but still quite behind when it comes to, you know, the gender gap.
Yeah, just to add an interesting fact, you know, to what Deena is saying, the population, the female population in the workforce in Latin America, it varies, you know, around 40%, 45%, you know, are female workers. But when you go to the top, you only find about 8% of executives, you know, women executives. So the gap is huge. And what happens is, you know, companies and organizations and the culture of the countries, they don't allow, you know, this gender gap to be reduced. So that's the biggest challenge, no doubt, in Latin America, to be more proactive on gender diversity.
It's really interesting. I think, you know, there's been so much focus on the conversation in the United States, especially over the last, you know, 6 to 12 months. To get that more global perspective is really a value add from this conversation. So thank you for that. All right, I have a question from the audience, which is, I've heard you speak about leadership character. So how does character influence diversity, advocacy, and strategy in your work?
Well, for me, I think in terms of character, it's about listening, right? You know, and obviously there's different character traits, and there's a lot of studies about, you know, character-driven leadership and what it brings to the table. But in terms of diversity, I think it's about being open to listen, to being receptive to different points of view and opinions, right? And to creating a team that doesn't only feed your strengths, but really complements your weaknesses and brings in those blind spots to you, and creating that space, right? In your staff meetings, in your team meetings, in your one-on-ones, to, you know, have somebody disagree with you, challenge you, bring a different point of view. And I think that that's how the intersection kind of character-driven leadership and diversity really melt together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a tough thing, right? To stand up and say, you know, I want to be heard, and to put yourself front and center. And I know you talked about that early in your journey, but it's hard for a lot of people to do that, and then you can be left behind. So that message of self-advocacy and character is really important. Another question we have, which is, what has been one of the biggest diversity wins of your career?
Let's see. I think, you know, honestly, I would say the four of us, the four women who reported to the president of Tech Data and went to that Yale program together, that was a really big win. I had seen throughout my career at Tech Data, different women come in and out of that team, that senior leadership team, but there was never any cohesion or collaboration. There's a lot more competition, I felt, than collaboration and cohesion. So us getting together and making the statement that we were going to, you know, get out of the business for 5 days together to go work on ourselves and actually focus on women in leadership, I thought was a really big statement to our peers and to our company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is a big statement. And then to see the difference when you come back, right?
Yep.
and how then that plays out in your work. So under the category of sort of like career wins, one of the questions that's been asked is, what's an example of a unique idea that you brought into one of the firms where you've worked that might, either have a spin on diversity or not?
Oh, good question. So a unique idea. Actually, one thing that we developed that I think does help diversity was kind of a day in the life. So what we did was, and it was part of our diversity, we had a diversity task force when we were kicking off in Miami some of these topics. And we created a program where people from logistics could see sales, and sales could see credit, and credit could see marketing, because it's very easy to finger point and say, these people don't get me, they don't know what I do, and it's much harder to do that once you've actually sat down with them and walked a day in their life. And so I think that was a way that we promoted diversity in experience for people. And then another thing that we did was we created a co-ed female, kind of like women in tech leadership council. And we had different articles and books that we read and discussed together. And one of them was the first one we kicked it off was the Imposter Syndrome. And it was really interesting to hear men come in and say they had never heard of it until they read, the book. And yet women were like, I'm dealing with this every day, and you're my boss and you don't even know it exists,
That's a really good example of one I think that most women can relate to, feeling that imposter syndrome, and then your boss walking and being like, what? It's not even, didn't even occur to me. Well, I do want to give a minute. If there are other questions from our audience, please do put those into the Q&A or the chat, or shoot an email to Gabby and she can ping those to me. So, we're always looking, Deena, for like advice, and especially in marketing, we like to try to be out front and center with some of these ideas. So as a Latina female tech leader, what's your advice for talent professionals to help them become better diversity advocates?
Yeah, I think number one is the courage, right? Find the courage to, bring it up, broach the topic, right? Speak the unspeakable, get out of your comfort zone, and in a professional, respectful way. But I think that that's probably one of the most important things we can do within our teams, within our companies, within our communities, right? Yeah. And that's what I would say is, start talking about it, start reading about it. There's all kinds of great articles. And like I said, this month I was actually surprised by that Harvard Business Review article, and I was like, I'm probably not thinking enough about, that aspect, that facet of diversity.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting when you brought that up in the beginning. It was an article you said in this month's HBR focusing on class around diversity around class, and I do think sometimes we can get stuck in our own lens, right? Like, it's incumbent on all of us to step outside our shoes and say, but what's it like over there? And what is it like in my role? I get to see the global perspective. So I'm just so curious, what's it like in India? What's going on in Asia? And to really get that understanding is so fascinating. But it's also scary, right? For people to speak up sometimes and be courageous. I think we're all afraid at different points in time of saying the wrong thing or looking dumb, or so I guess, and maybe this is a question for you, Deena, but also I'm curious about Lizette and Dwayne's perspective. Like, how do you handle that fear? Like, we just get out there and be ourselves and hope that that's that's enough?
I mean, for me, it's been an evolution for sure. I can think back to my 20s and being much less comfortable, right? Even, and I think it comes down to educating yourself and feeling comfortable in what you know and how you grow. But I remember, not occupying space at a board table, being afraid to lean in on the table, being afraid to interrupt and speak loudly and stuff. And I think that all of that comes with, educating yourself, getting to have people around you that can actually support you and point those things out and teach you in those teachable moments. You should actually, if you weren't heard, say it again. And then having champions that say, no, actually, I think Suzanne had a thought on that we didn't pay enough attention to. And let's go back to that thought, right? So that you have less fear about speaking out next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lizette or Dwayne, is there anything you guys want to add to that you see in your work or from your careers?
To me, I think, one word that Deena just mentioned, being courageous. I think you need to step out there. And we as women, me as a Latina, having worked for, a lot of US companies, US clients, you have to learn to feel comfortable and be courageous, to look different, to sound different, and still be there. And but it's also about the other side of the table, being comfortable with that. So it's a process. I think we're gaining good path over there. But I think courage and getting ready, getting prepared, that's the key. And keep bringing the conversation. That's what we've got to do.
Well, one of the things that I did in my career that I thought was really helpful was I read a lot about successful leadership and then observed people who are in senior leadership positions 2-3 levels ahead of me and tried to model what I read and what I observed with what was comfortable for me. Obviously, I can't be someone else, but I can see some of the things that they've done that work and that are successful, how they present, how they work with others, how they present in meetings, interact with others effectively, how they get things done. And so try to incorporate some of those essentially best practices in corporate behavior to enable me to do more of what was working and at the same time minimize things that don't seem to be as successful in the workplace. But this has been really awesome, Deena. Thank you so much for being a part of our family today and sharing so many thoughts and perspectives. And we wanted to be cognizant of everyone's time. But really, thank you so much. I think you've given us a lot to think about and really added some value to us and our team.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Deena. And thanks everyone for being with us today.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time. And we will be sending out some thoughts from today and some wrap ups on some of Deena's great points she made. So watch your inbox for that.